What is up guys, Alex from Lakey Wargames here and welcome to today's video. Today I wanted to take a look at why Nighthaunt are struggling so much in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. So for those of you who may not know, I am myself a day one Nighthaunt player. When OS first came around, Nighthaunt started off as just a tiny sub-faction within the Death Grand Alliance and had around 4 or 5 war scrolls total. I was hooked on the idea of an army of ghosts, and it's amazing to see how far they've grown over the years, becoming a fully fledged death faction, currently having 2 battle tomes behind them and supported with a grand range of ever-expanding awesome models. Fast forward nearly 9 years of Age of Sigmar with them as a faction under my belt, and Nighthaunt in my opinion have been suffering heavily from the same pattern on the tabletop. That is, having a strong surge of play and a win rate, then suddenly crashing back down and spending the rest of the time in the lower ends of the win rate percentage table. It's a feeling that weighs heavily in my gut that Nighthaunt have never been a powerhouse faction for very long at any one time. Even when the rules have favoured them, for example, the Last General's Handbook for match play being based all around small heroes, of which Nighthaunt are plentiful. So why is this the case, and why do Nighthaunt always seem to come up short? Let's take a little deeper look. First of all, I wanted to check some stats on my suspicion and make sure it wasn't just in my head. A massive shout out to the guys over at the Honest Wargamer and the TSN Stats team for doing all the hard work that they put into their stats and providing us in the Age of Sigmar community with access to all this information. If stats are your sort of thing, I would highly recommend checking out their YouTube channel and the stats website, all of which I will leave linked in the description below. Looking at the current Nighthaunt win rate versus the rest of the factions from competitive play, we can see that Nighthaunt are right down in the bottom bracket with a win rate of 43%. Looking at the factions around us, ignoring cities for all purposes because we know that their new book is just around the corner, the only factions doing worse than Nighthaunt are Cruel Boys and Bone Splitters, which are commonly known as some of the worst factions in competitive play. This is generally down to them not having much support within their respective factions, weaker war scrolls, and the playstyles not suiting the meta at the same time. I can hear you saying already, but Alex, Nighthaunt have some fantastic support, rules, and units to boot, so why are they down in the gutter? There is a reason why Nighthaunt were able to capture the top of the meta for a short time, and other factions couldn't. So what changed? And you'd be right. Looking at this next graphic, at the meta representation versus the win rate, we can see a spike in people playing Nighthaunt around May 2022, which is around the time that the new battle tome dropped, and the win rate also catapulted up. Now, I don't have the stats from the old Nighthaunt battle tome, but I felt this exact situation play out when that book dropped. We got new rules, we made new tactics, and winning became a lot easier. Then, in the following months, it got harder and harder, and within 6 months, we were back to struggling like we were before. So why has that happened again so fast with the new book? I know it's a normal cycle of tomes come out, then over time, newer and newer tomes drop with slightly better rules, and push others down the pecking order. But Nighthaunt's rise and fall always seems so sudden, where other armies will stick toward the top, or only slowly fall down to the middle of the pack. Well, I have a few theories on what keeps happening to Nighthaunt, so let's get into them. So my first point of contention about why Nighthaunt struggle so much in the competitive limelight is because of the limited style of play. This battle tome would trick you into thinking you can play in a variety of styles and really flex how you want your ghosts to work on the table. Which of course, technically you can. No one can stop you running any combination of units in any way that you wish, but to make this book efficient and give yourself the best chance to win, you really have to double down onto a single path. For example, one of the strongest elements of the entire Nighthaunt game plan is the Wave of Terror allegiance ability. You inflict really strong debuffs into enemy units when you charge them. These debuffs are stackable, and with our War Scroll units not being the best in a fight with their base stat line, you really need to get enough of these off to bring them down, so you can cripple them in one fell swoop. These buffs only last for that one combat phase, so if you fail to cripple the target, when it swings over to the enemy's turn, they'll be able to hit you back in full force once again. Now you only get one Wave of Terror per charging unit. This means you will need multiple units charging into the enemy to be able to stack them, and this causes 2 separate problems. The first being it means if you take a Horde style army, you won't be able to pull off many Wave of Terrors to affect the enemy, and you will have large portions of your army in a single point on the table. That might not be great if your mission has multiple objectives and you need to spread out to capture them. So that also means breaking your army up into what is known as an MSU build. MSU meaning multiple small units. This will allow you to have a choice of how many units you want to pile into the enemy to be able to get off multiple waves of terror debuffs, and also have enough units elsewhere on the table at the same time. Okay, so what's the problem here? Smaller units gives more flexibility in piloting anyway, so getting more wave of terror buffs because of it has got to be a good thing, right? And that statement isn't wrong at all. The problem being MSU builds put you on the back foot in terms of list building. A lot of the competitive armies will be using the battle regiment battalion to dictate the turn order and pace of the game from the off. In a battle regiment, your core force is limited to 3 heroes and 5 standard units. If your plan was to run a group of 30 chain rafts to control a main objective, in order to make use of your wave of terror, you need to break these down into 3 units of 10 rasps, which would only leave you 2 slots left in your battle regiment. So you're already forced with a choice of giving up maxing out your wave of terror bonuses or restricting the entire build on your list. Now that's just one of the choices you're having around a single allegiance ability. Your build choice will get squashed even further throughout this book when you get to your sub-faction choice. There are only 4 to choose from to begin with, and most notably Scarlet Doom and Quicksilver Dead sub-faction rules are tied to a single unit each, the Bladegeist Revenant and Dread Scythe Harridans respectively. This means you don't want either of these units in your army, these sub-factions are wasted on you, and half of the choice is already removed. And if you want to lean into one of those factions, you really need to push at least 2, if not more, of those units, because no other units in your army will gain a benefit from taking that sub-faction, and it doesn't seem right to give just a small buff to a single unit across your whole army. If you don't feed into the forced upon spam from those sub-factions, you could take the Grieving Legion, which only benefits units with 10 or more models in them. So if you're banking on that MSU style of play we spoke about to max out your wave of terror, a single loss in any unit will cause you to lose your entire bonus, as well as those units starting with less than 10 models not gaining it anyway. So you can see from a process of elimination that leaves you with just 1 sub-faction left to keep most of the doors open in your list building process. We've only spoken about a single allegiance ability and a sub-faction choice, and we're already having our hands tied. We haven't even got to the playing to the missions, grand strategy choice, units to score battle tactics with, or what heroes we want to lead our armies. Such limitations can help steer your list into a single cohesive army working together, which is great, but the limited style means that once other factions have seen your tricks once, they will know your game plan and how best to beat you in future. This to me explains the sudden drop-off rate in such a short time, because when we're as a faction we try mixing things up, we're losing out one way or another on buffs that make us strong, and if we play into them, people see Nighthaunt and they know what you're going to do before you do it, thus allowing them to play to your counters. Now you're probably thinking, so what if the style is limited? It was strong enough then, like how Daughters of Cain lived off bow snake spam for so long, why can't Nighthaunt do that with our tricks? Well, there's a few more reasons why we struggle so much as a faction. Like our wave of terror, it really stacks up in the big picture and brings us down, so let's get into some more of them. So my next gripe with Nighthaunt that causes us to struggle as a faction is our staying power, or therefore lack of in my opinion. As a faction, Nighthaunt pays a little more points per unit on the effect that they will gain Ethereal, which, although fitting for an army of ghost lore-wise, isn't always the friend it lends itself to be in gaming terms for Nighthaunt armies. Ethereal stops all positive and negative modifiers to all saving throws, as well as gaining a 6+ ward save to Nighthaunt units. Ignoring save modifiers is amazing when you're fighting into an enemy with Rend, as regardless of how good that Rend is, you always get to make your saving throw and ward on top of that. Someone hitting you with a Rend 3 damage 2 weapon? No problem. You can dodge those attacks on a steady 4+, 6++. The natural counter to Ethereal for normal attacks is to drown them in a weight of dice. Why put one high damage attack through when you can make someone take 10 saving throws, knowing on average they're going to fail half of them and do the same damage? And as cool as Ethereal is, I have no natural problem with how it works as a mechanic. You have to realise that this form of saving throw means you're always chancing and gambling on if you're going to survive or not. This causes a lot of unreliable situations because of it. And although you can run the averages at the end of the day, this is a game with dice, and dice can be unpredictable. There'll be games where your Nighthaunt are nigh indestructible, shrugging off anything and anything. There will also be games where you fail every 4+ save you're given, regardless of the quality of attacks hitting your units. And again, that's okay, because that happens in Warhammer regardless of whether you're ethereal or not. This starts to become a problem, however, when we look at the wider game state. Current Age of Sigmar is a game that's absolutely flooded with units that can cause mortal wounds. Mortal wounds ignore all armour and can only be saved by a ward save. Nighthaunt is balanced around being unaffected by rend, and thus a lot of heroes within the faction have a low wounds count, even on the bigger heroes. For example, Lady Ollander, Reikenor the Grimhaler, and Kurdos Valentian, who are the 3 big names of the book, are only 7 wounds each. Most unknown, cheap, nobody heroes in the game are on 5 wounds, by comparison. Other big names out there are boasting a lot more wounds. For example, Archaon has 25, Catacross has 20, and even a non-named Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon has 16. And there is no plan B on the Nighthaunt heroes. Apart from Lady Ollander, who, if you hit them with mortal wounds, has a 4+ ward save, all the other Nighthaunt only have a 6+ ward save. Once you factor in how many factions have easy access to mortal wounds, you can see that these heroes will be melted very easily by vastly smaller units. This wasn't always the case in Age of Sigmar, and I wish that mortal wounds would be scaled back and saved for more elite units and heroes as it once was. But in the current game, lowly units such as squigs and zombies can cause mortal wounds in waves. Then add in armies like Lumineth, who can shoot you from 30 inches away and drag you down with heavily ranged mortals, which can be negated by the new Lookout Sir rules, thankfully, but then they just hit you with Techless through a spell portal with another AoE mortal wound splash damage, and you're dead anyway. And we won't even mention what happens to Nighthaunt heroes when they have to face off against the new Seraphon. This wouldn't be such a problem though if there were other ways to help reduce the damage suffered in this way. Nighthaunt healing took a massive hit with the 3rd edition book, with nearly all the heals now only affecting summonable units. Your heroes are not safe from mortal wounds at range. Sure, we have the Seal of Shaiish spell that gives a 5+ ward to a friendly unit, but you can only put this in one place, so if you're using it to cover one hero with, the enemy will just target the other one. Discorporate is nice, but it doesn't work unless you're in combat or being shot at, and only lasts until the end of that one phase. Also, command abilities aren't something Nighthaunt can spam out, so this is only situationally nice and not a reliable save. My point is, to all this, 3rd edition has bred a meta where mortal wound damage at range and in an AoE to hit multiple units at once is rife. Nighthaunt are a faction that can't shrug off mortal wounds very well, nor can we heal back from them reliably. Nighthaunt also relies on its heroes for powerful buffs. Getting hit across the table all at once and losing them in one shot from spells is bad news for the rest of your game. It's unfortunate, but unless the game shakes us up in 4th edition and mortal wounds are scaled back, this is just something Nighthaunt will forever struggle with. I know Games Workshop will be hesitant to boost our heroes too high in wounds, because then against armies who don't do mortal wound spam, we will become oppressive. But seeing Soulblight being able to take a 3+ ethereal save Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with 16 wounds, who can heal 6 wounds a turn, as well as OBR also being able to heal sort of 9 wounds a turn easily to units or heroes alike, I can't help but feel Nighthaunt fall way behind their other Death brothers and sisters in sustain, even though we pay more for it to just be ethereal and have that blanket which gets countered far too often and is just a gamble of 50-50 when it isn't counted. This leads me to my last point today, and that is Nighthaunt will struggle to come back from behind a lot of the time. I'm not saying that it isn't possible, but once the tide begins to turn against you, or you make a mistake that costs you an important objective point, you will really feel this. Nighthaunt, as we spoke about earlier, are an army that relies on multiple strings to be pulled at once to pull off plays and combinations. Sometimes all it takes is for one of the parts of a 10-step plan to not work, and the whole turn comes crashing down. The battle tactics in the Nighthaunt book aren't great, so the vast amount of armies out there who now have them will often be able to pull off a few easy tactics, as well as whatever the current handbook tactics might be. Nighthaunt can't fall back onto this. Beyond the mass panic tactic, none of them are really reliable, and you really have to be on it at all times and keep setting yourself up for the battle tactics. The main problem is, although Nighthaunt have some fantastic movement tricks, it can be a lot to take in. keeping the army in the right place at the right time to pull things off, and making sure all your buffing units are in the right place. Now, I'm not saying that having an army with a high skill rate needed to pilot it is a bad thing. It certainly makes a nice challenge for anyone who might enjoy it, but Nighthaunt games, more than often than not, than any other army, in my opinion, are won or lost on a knife's edge. This army really doesn't have the numbers to throw bodies away. Your heroes need protecting at all times. The tactics game is all up to the handbook, but if they're easy to score, then it's also easy for your opponent to score them. Each unit lost will hurt you, and in an MSU style you have to be very, very careful with them. Although you could say this applies to a few other armies in Age of Sigmar, a lot of the top tier armies you would face in a competitive element will be able to have all these bases covered and a plan B. But Nighthaunt, with the list construction challenges we spoke about at the start, often won't be able to have such a forgiving fallback plan when things go wrong. So, in conclusion, what is the point to saying all this? And thank you for hanging around this long if you've made it this far. I really appreciate you listening to my opinions and mad ramblings, and I would love to hear your thoughts on why Nighthaunt have such a hard time in 3rd edition. The reason I wanted to make this video was less of doom and gloom, woe is me, Nighthaunt can't win type vibes that I've probably given off, but instead put out some of the glaring weaknesses and challenges you will have to face as a fellow Nighthaunt general, and to keep in mind for your games as well as your list building this edition. I still really enjoy Nighthaunt as a faction even 9 years on, and they can be really effective if everything goes right. But it seems that one-track mind, handful of tricks pony can only go so far, and that's why we see Nighthaunt spike up and fall so fast. People have learned to deal with us, and the current meta in this edition with its power units just strike us like kryptonite. I've been focused a lot on Ossiarch Bonereapers as of late, but I do plan on bringing more guides and ideas to the channel to see if we can't stop the rot and get some glory back to that Nighthaunt win rate. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on this down in the comments below, and what other topics you'd be interested in discussing in the future. As always guys, many thanks, stay safe, happy wargaming. Psst! Hey you! Did you know that Lakey Wargames now has an official eBay store? You can buy yourself all kinds of pre-painted and new on sprue hobby goodness and support the channel at the same time. There's a link in the description below if you want to check it out. I'd greatly appreciate it, and it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Okay, see you in the next one.